Mozambique is facing growing political instability following the recent presidential elections. Post-election violence has erupted as the opposition challenges results, which were declared Frelimo party as the winner. The government has threatened to deploy the army to quell the unrest. The civil society groups are calling for SADC's urgent intervention. Let's now get some analysis on the situation and the implications of this in the region. SADC's Director on Organ and Political Defense and Security Affairs, Professor Kula Theletsane, is now joining us for that conversation. Professor Theletsane, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So we see that there has been this call that has been made. The meeting will be taking place, but tell us about what the assessment is of the situation in Mozambique and what will be on the agenda of that summit.
My colleague, good morning, and good morning to the viewers. I just want to correct the narrative. The upcoming summit in Zimbabwe that was not called because of what is happening in Mozambique. It was called long before what transpired in Mozambique. However, that doesn't mean that the situation in Mozambique will not be discussed there. I just wanted to correct that it is not called because of what is happening in Mozambique. It is called because of many other things that are happening in the region, and of course, Mozambique will most probably form part of the discussion.
Yeah. So what's the assessment of what's currently happening in Mozambique, and as part of that agenda, what sort of intervention would we possibly be looking at?
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The assessment will be, firstly, we have seen what has happened in Mozambique. We went to observe elections, and when we came back, situation started deteriorating. So what normally happens in a situation like that, firstly, you will ask the country to use the existing internal systems, and we can clearly see the internal systems are not holding. And in the event internal systems or mechanisms are not holding, so what we will then do, we will engage internally, and the best thing will be to deploy the panel of elders. Within SADC, we have what we call the panel of elders that is mostly comprised of former heads of states. You will have your mediation reference group, and that is the team that you would want to send to Mozambique to engage, and not only the government of Mozambique, but also to engage the opposition parties and all other stakeholders to find an amicable solution. That will be the way to go.
That will be the way to go. So in terms of the observer mission's own report, will that form part of the discussion that will be taking place? And are you able to share with us what SADC's observer mission has found in Mozambique? This is now speaking about pre-election, during the election, and post the election.
Yes. If you remember, immediately 2 days after the elections in Mozambique, we released what we call a preliminary statement that I can share with you electronically if you are looking for. We observed, and then after 2 days, we will release what we call a preliminary statement. But then observation continues 30 days after the elections. Then 30 days after the election, what is happening now is going to form part of the report. So 30 days after the elections, then we will submit a comprehensive report, a full report, and unfortunately, I will not be able to share anything with you about the report because even the government of Mozambique hasn't received the report yet. So once the report is complete after 30 days, it will be sent to the chair of the organ, who will then sign it, and the chair will share it with the president of Mozambique and subsequently all the relevant stakeholders within Mozambique.
Yeah. Are you able to confirm whether the preliminary report did declare that the elections were free and fair?
The preliminary report spoke about the peaceful nature of the election, and hence I said to you, it is very difficult in a preliminary report to pronounce yourself as to whether the elections are free and fair. The answer to your question, no. The preliminary statement did not mention anything about the fairness of the elections for one simple reason, because the process is not complete. So you do not want to pronounce yourself prematurely. So as I said, we are still observing even beyond the election day, 30 days after. Only in the final report, then we will be able to pronounce ourselves in that regard.
Yeah, and just juxtaposing this to, for instance, what the European Union's observers are saying, their argument was that there have been serious flaws with the electoral body, which has been accused of manipulation to keep Frelimo in power. Would that be an observation that has been made by the SADC electoral observers as well?
Unfortunately, I cannot say that now, my good sir. Hence, I said we'll have to wait for the final report. And out of respect for the government of Mozambique, I cannot pronounce what is in the report before the government see the report, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that make the situation any difficult then for SADC? And also asking this on the basis of some people losing confidence in SADC, for instance, how SADC dealt with the issue in Zimbabwe, how SADC dealt with the issues in Eswatini, that this lack of confidence has an impact on SADC's own credibility. Does that concern you at all?
It does, but to a certain extent, I think sometimes people do not understand the system, my good sir, because at the end of the day, we as SADC, I'm in Mauritius at the moment observing elections. When we finish here with stakeholders releasing the report, even our final report, what we do is we will have recommendations. But I always use this example to say, I see us observing elections like a doctor and a patient relationship, whereby we examine a patient and we give a patient a medication and a prescription. But if a patient doesn't follow what is in the prescription, we cannot be blamed for it. What I mean by that is we have recommendations. And of course, countries are sovereign. Once you give them the recommendations, you give them a report, you have no mechanism to enforce that. But it's a recommendation that the country will, out of their own will, implement or not implement. Yes, I understand people are losing confidence in SADC, but I think from SADC side, as the Secretariat, we are doing our job, we are observing, we are giving the report, we are giving recommendations that will ultimately improve elections in the future and good governance at the end of the day.
Yeah, and of course, with respecting the sovereignty of Mozambique, what's SADC's evaluation of how the Mozambican government has responded to these allegations of vote rigging or voter fraud, and on top of that as well, the violence that then followed because of that?
Yeah, look, we have observed that. What I'm not sure of is what are the internal processes within Mozambique that are taking place that we might not know, that are not in the public domain. But we are assured that the government of Mozambique is handling the situation. And if you are told that the government is handling the situation, you can't really go and want to know what is it that you are exactly doing. And of course, we are concerned about the violence of which SADC will intervene. SADC will do something about but as to whether they are busy doing something, we are not really 100% sure of what is it that they are doing, but we believe there are internal processes, there are courts of law, and that is why in our preliminary statement at the end, we stated that we appeal to those who will not be happy with the results to follow the country's internal processes to air their discomfort.
Yeah, just a final one, Prof. So there is the election dispute that is currently taking place. The summit will then be happening. Who represents Mozambique in such a case?
The summit is it's heads of states.
Yeah.
So it means then if we have a summit of heads of state, the head of state of that country will be there.
So in this case, the newly elected head of state, there's a dispute over that. So who would be representing Mozambique? Do you know?
No, but remember, sir, I don't know if you follow what is happening in Mozambique. The incoming president is not sworn in yet.
Yes.
So logic tells me the president is still President Nyusi. I think so. because he hasn't been sworn in yet.
Yes, no, indeed. Thank you so much for that. Truly appreciate it. There is Professor Kula Theletsane, Director on Organ on Politics, Defence and Security Affairs in SADC. Let's now bring into this conversation as well Rosa Latzenberg, Foundation Fretsen Kulengwa. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. I'm just listening into what the Secretariat had to say now about their observation of the elections, as well as that they don't know exactly what the Mozambican government is doing about the current violence that is playing out. What's your take on this?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I think they should know what's going on. I mean, the media, the independent media, is always showing what's happening in Mozambique. I mean, the social media is full of reports of what's happening in Mozambique currently. What's happening in Mozambique is a very high level of rejection of the results. People are on the streets. Political parties are mobilizing their supporters to reject. The police is responding to those those demonstrations, sometimes violently. There have been a dozen of people who have lost their lives. Some have been arrested, and lots of people have been injured, and the situation is chaotic. So I'm very sure that the SADC is aware of the developments in Mozambique, but maybe diplomatically so they would prefer not to focus on that. But maybe before we move on further into this conversation, I think Mozambique's current situation needs to be placed in a much bigger context. It's a context which is associated with the colonial legacy of an authoritarian and centralized state, but also with the post-colonial state that was again authoritarian and centralized, and currently which dynamics of which are currently affecting Mozambican process of building democracy. So authoritarianism and centralism has been very high in the Mozambican state, and of course the responses to this kind of state has been violent. So violence has been part of the not only the struggle for independence in Mozambique, but has been also part of the post-colonial state building in Mozambique, including today in the current process of development in Mozambique, where we see violence in mining and extractivist areas in Cabo Delgado, for example, and including the presence of foreign troops in Mozambique. So that's I think it would be important to give that historical perspective as well.
Yeah. I think the other thing about these elections as well is whether or not the opposition would be able to bring forward the evidence that would convince the courts that these elections have been flawed. But then the other part around this is that even though President Philip Nyusi continues as president, while there is this particular impasse, for him himself, there is a question around legitimacy, considering the party that he comes from.
Yeah, so I think there are two elements to your question. One, I mean, it has to do with the capacity of the opposition to bring forward proofs of, the allegations of fraud. I think that's very easy, and they have managed to do that. They have managed to bring forward, a number of evidence about that. I'm not sure even SADC was able to see when they were on the ground and observing the elections. I mean, the social media was full of videos and pictures of acts of vote rigging, stuffing, alteration of results, and so on and so on. I think evidence is widespread, and it has always been there. The biggest problem there is not about the evidence per se, but it's about how these evidence are approached by the institutions that have the responsibility of taking them into consideration. So I'm talking about the courts, I'm talking about the electoral bodies as well. The thing is that it's widely believed, and it's actually also easy to prove this from the events on the ground, that these institutions do not work properly. These institutions exhibit control specifically of the ruling party. So the people are not just on the streets, and they did not just decide to wake up and not give credibility to those institutions. This is a result of the way these institutions perform. I want to give make a comparison to what happened in South Africa when there were allegations from the MK against the Independent Electoral Commission. No one went on the streets saying that the MK was right. No one went demonstrate against the results that were published by the Independent Electoral Commission. Even the MK itself was not able to prove, because people believe in the credibility and transparency of the Independent Electoral Commission. But in South Africa, and this is not the same in Mozambique, this is the biggest reason why it's very hard to convince the Mozambicans to wait for the confirmation of this, final confirmation of these results by the courts, and more particularly by the Constitutional Court, because people do not believe in these institutions as being transparent, credible, and independent. So the other element to your question has to do with the legitimacy of President Nyusi to, I'm not sure if I understood correctly, to continue running the country. Obviously, I mean, the ideal would be that the next president would be sworn in January next year. I hope that this is going to be the case, but I also hope that the next president, in order to have that legitimacy that is expected, or that we would all love to see, would result from a credible and a fair and a transparent electoral process.
Fredson, thank you so much for your time.